Well, I want to welcome Nathan to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natasha. I'm happy to be here and super honored that you invited me to talk about some topics with you.
Yeah, I love your videos. I am constantly referring people to your YouTube videos and your online classes. And so I thought it'd be good for us to just chat together, kind of brainstorm together for the parents out there who are struggling with anxiety or OCD, how to help them. And you'd be a good person because you work with adults. I don't. I'm an anxious person, so I can be kind of like the client, partly and partly therapist. But it is good to have a clinician that comes on that works with the adult population and particularly parents with anxiety or OCD. Do you
Mhm.
see that often pop up in your practice?
Yeah, and very often I see adults and I also see kids as well. But it's interesting how when I'll see a child, it's usually a parent that's in the room that also has anxiety or also has OCD. And it's pretty common to see kind of that mixture of it. So it's almost directing the child as well as the parent how to handle kind of your own OCD or your own anxiety, um, so that yeah you can do what you love, being a parent or working or whatever it is in your life.
Yeah, and you're bringing up a good point that sometimes they may not be the identified client, but inevitably, I remember this in my practice wasn't that long ago. That you're navigating the whole family dynamic. That anxiety and OCD is highly genetic, and so building up those tools and addressing the parents' triggers too um, can be tricky. What do you see show up for parents when they're trying to help their kids when they have their own anxiety or OCD?
Mm-hmm. That's, I think the nature of anxiety tends to look for potential problems, especially when it comes to parenting. I'm a parent myself, and like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just kind of guessing. And
Right?
so when it comes to OCD, it's like guessing times 10. I have to guess if I'm doing the right thing or if my child's going to get better, or should I send them to this party? Should I put a mask on them? Whatever the fears are in the world, it's all these what ifs, and with OCD, it definitely expounds on that. Um, and so it's easy to take the route of like, I think this is the best route. I'm not sure, but the brain won't stop thinking about the decisions that are made. And so, whether it's parenting themselves, or it's just working through other issues in their life, whether it's contamination fears or, it impacts just the family life. And sometimes they just don't know what to do with things like that.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things that we can explore. So we're bringing up different ways that it can show up for parents. So one, in their child's treatment in and of itself, right? OCD or anxiety can pop up, like you're talking about. Um, just in typical parenting, it can pop up, and then you have this separate and not 100% separate area of like their own theme that may not relate to their child, but they also might be struggling with their own thing. Um, that can play a role in their child's anxiety or OCD too.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think when it's a child that has OCD, a lot of parents will tell me like, they can work on their own stuff, but I'm not sure I'm ready to work on mine. Um, just because they're like, as we get older, obviously there's more responsibilities and there's so many things going on. And you've dealt with OCD or anxiety for so long that it's like, I could just keep going the way I am. But what I find is the world starts shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, that it's harder to function sometimes and do the things that you want to do. And when helping a child, it's I think we do this naturally as parents, so like, do as I say, not as I do kind of mentality. They're like, I'm going to do this thing, but you can't do it. And so it might be stop doing those compulsions, stop washing your hands, but I'm still going to do it myself, or I'm still going to do my own compulsions. So just kind of wrapping around how can parents know for themselves, what can I do, as whether while my child is going through their own treatment, or if I'm going for myself, what can I do yeah, to at least treat my OCD and do the right tools for it.
Yeah. And some parents do say that. They'll say, I don't want to work on my OCD. Or you might even actually not realize that you have OCD until you're actually hearing your child talk in therapy and be like, well, I do that. Oh, shoot. So there's that aspect too. But I do feel like I know I've encountered a lot of parents who are like, yeah, just focus on him. Like I'm all good. And I wonder, how we can motivate parents to see the value in them working on their own anxiety or OCD while their child works on it, or even if their child doesn't want to work on it, because sometimes I know, I don't know if you'll get this. I'll get the pushback of like, I've been like, kind of like what you said, I've been like this for so long, so like, let's just leave this. I'm not fixable. And I don't have energy for this. Like, I really have to focus on my child. I'm dealing with all this stuff. I'll get into treatment later.
Yeah. I I think about like my life right now with all the responsibilities I have and taking care of my kids and trying to exercise, like all these different things. Like, and then adding on top of that, like, oh, and by the way, your job is to go face some of these fears and not do those compulsions you've always been doing. Like, why would we want to add that on top of everything else? So I like that you brought that up, like the motivation. Can you, how can we possibly motivate a parent? The one thing I know is that like treatment works for OCD if somebody's willing to do it and they have the right tools for it. That let's say they're working with their child's going to be working through exposure and response prevention most likely. And seeing a parent do that with a child, I've had that happen multiple times where they you kind of use each other in a way like, hey mom, we talked about you're supposed to be touching that sponge or whatever it is. And so the child can almost call the parent out and they're like, hey, but you were supposed to go do this thing. That definitely motivates and brings that camaraderie, I can't say that word, together.
Mm-hmm.
That having that accountability partner definitely can help. And so that's one thing that I look at is whether it's a parent on their own or it's a parent with a child, like how can you guys support each other through this thing?
Yeah. And I think it's such a good point because it really helps your child. And I think sometimes if we think it helps our child, we're more likely to work on it. Like I didn't work on my social anxiety at all until my kids popped up with social anxiety. And I was like, oh my gosh. Well, first they were really embarrassing and they were really triggering my social anxiety. So especially my youngest, she would like no filter. And she was like she was like a walking exposure. So I knew I needed to deal with it. But I think if we can realize that we're actually helping our kids by making it a family affair, then, it's not like there's a problem child. It's like, this is what we do in our family. This is what we do. We fight fears. We walk through things. And having our kids call us on our stuff, like you said, I think is very empowering for our kids. And so then it's kind of like this democracy of, exposures and working on things. I know my daughter, so she's in my support group for my community. So she's, is this monthly support group. So she's on there and she starts to tell all the kids how she does a compulsion at night where she has to say, I'll see you in the morning. So it's like a compulsion based out of grief, at the loss of her dad. And I secretly felt like I had a compulsion where I had to say, okay, I'll see you in the morning, because we didn't see him in the morning. He died, he never woke up. And so when she said that, she told everyone in the group, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I won't see you in the morning. And my heart just like, my heartbeat started to race like, oh my gosh, I hope she doesn't say that, but, we have to practice what we preach. And so, she's stronger than me in some areas. And so she would say, and she continues to this day, says, won't see you in the morning, mom, which I'm sure probably is going to be really weird if we have relatives staying over, and I have to say back, won't see you in the morning. And, it's modeling that. It's modeling, and sometimes our kids can be, I think, beautiful teachers too. So I like your point that you brought up about calling each other out on that stuff.
That's a perfect response to something like that, because it really is like, it's uncomfortable. It seems wrong, shouldn't be doing this. But when we recognize it as a compulsion, that's the direction we go, is like, if my brain says to do this, I might actually say the opposite of what it is. And it
Yeah.
gets easier. It's a skill just like anything else. We just do over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But I love that modeling piece, because kids are always going to be watching what we do. And I think as parents, we sometimes can have that mentality that like it's too late for us, but we can help them. They can do their thing. But that's one thing for any parent, is like, it's definitely not too late. Like, I've worked with individuals who are 70 plus years old, finally working on their OCD and anxiety and seeing success with it. It's like not too late. Life can be much brighter. It can be just more free. And I think it's getting through some of the hard stuff to get to the easy stuff.
Yeah. It's never too late. And I think people do think that it's too late, or it's going to be more, it's going to be more energy. I'm going to have to expend more energy than I'm already expending to like then focus on myself, when really you don't. If your child has anxiety or OCD, just jump on that bandwagon. So they're picking their exposures. What are your exposures? They're touching this. What are you touching? So I don't think it has to be more work. I think you can actually piggyback on your kids,
Absolutely. I think for any parent with OCD specifically, like getting your own treatment outside of, sitting in the room maybe with your child can be so beneficial, to just know what to do. And that in itself, like that's how we parent our children, is by what we learn. And so if I'm learning to tolerate uncertainty, I'm going to teach my kids to tolerate uncertainty in their life. And so I think it's just building skills for yourself that you want to teach your child.
Yeah. And getting your own support, whether that's through a clinician, or if you don't have access or you can't afford therapy for the whole family, taking one of your online classes just to jumpstart. But I do find, and I'm sure you found this too, where I'll have a child make progress and then it's triggering the parent. So either the child's doing things, if they have the same theme, the child's doing things, touching things that the parent's OCD says is wrong. And so they will sometimes shut down progress inadvertently because they can't handle the discomfort, or they get triggered in session. Child's doing exposure and then they can't sit with the discomfort themselves. I've had parents check out. I've never seen them again. The other parent always brings them from then on. I'm like, what happened to her? It was too much for her. So, yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point to really dive into that support.
Yeah. When I think of all the priorities in our life, like children, I mean, if we came up with our own list, like for me, it would be, my family, religion, work, like all these different things. That mental health, like where does that belong in my list? Because if my mental health is way down on the bottom, how am I going to achieve all my other values and goals? That it's sometimes really tough to put that back near the top, which in my opinion, even above sometimes family in the moment, or sometimes work, where individuals I've seen sometimes literally have to take away those other responsibilities for the moment and say, treatment is all I'm doing right now. And I'm going to work on it every day, sometimes even for hours, to get to where I need to be, instead of thinking it as just another thing to add on top of my list where I'm already so busy. It's like, what are some things I can forego for a little bit? Can't get rid of our family, obviously, but we can change up different responsibilities that we have to make this more of a priority. And, I think we talk about motivation, but kind of my thing is like, we don't have to wait for motivation to come to do the things we think we need to do. That if we're waiting for that motivation, sometimes it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. And it may never even show up.
Oh yeah. Motivation, in my opinion, comes from doing the things that we felt like we needed to do. And so if I start exercising, for example, I'm going to not, like, I don't want to do it personally, but I know if I do it, I'm going to be more motivated to do it the next day and the next day. And so I didn't start with motivation. I gained it over time by doing the thing I felt like I needed to do.
That's a good point. Yeah. Because I think people do sit around waiting for motivation, and that may never come. And so it will feel more hopeful when you start to dabble in these things and you're like, you know what, that feels good. I feel like I can do that now. I can sit with that discomfort more. And I agree with you. I feel like the priority, as far as like faith and connection, friendships, family, our job, our safety, these life blocks are glued together by our mental health. And so if we don't have mental health, it's just going to fall apart, because mental health is what glues us together. And if you don't take care of your own mental health first, you can't help your kids, because you're not an anchor, and I totally get that from my own experience, going through grief. It's like I had to deal with my own grief. I had to deal with my own mental health in order to be there for my kids, because dealing with their struggles and my struggles at the same time were just a sinking ship. And so I think it's a good shift for parents. Shift sounded like I said the bad word. It's a good shift for parents to see that that's a priority and that they don't have to be gung-ho about it.
I love that. It's almost like building that foundation. If the foundation isn't strong, everything else is going to crumble.
Yeah.
And it's not later. I'll do this later. It's usually I got to do this now, because later tends to not come, or it's like rock bottom and life becomes a lot harder. Treatment becomes harder. So that's what can I do right now to make these changes in my life? And it's usually, I like what you said, it's through a clinician that you can find in your area that actually specializes in OCD, which sometimes is really hard to come by.
Mm-hmm.
It's finding the correct tools and not giving up, because if I'm facing fears, my brain's going to probably tell me not to, because it wants to protect me. And so having that direction to say, I know your brain says not to, but we're actually going to do it instead. Go against this, because it's sending some false signals that you need to retrain it to know better.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times parents, and I get this on my own personal level, I feel like unless we think we're actually doing it for our kids in some weird roundabout way, we're not motivated to do it. We'll do more for our kids a lot of times than we'll do for ourselves, which is unfortunate. And that's a whole podcast episode in and of itself. But I feel like sometimes we can be sabotaging therapy and not know it. So there's a motivation on that aspect. But also, we might be doing things because we think it's normal or typical, and it's really our anxiety or OCD. And so we're parenting that way. And I can totally throw myself under the bus on this one, is being cognizant of like what your own things are. What are the things that you get nervous about? I was cutting my kids' food way longer than I should have. I was like, choking is a number one theme for me. And hot dogs were being cut, horizontally. They're not even toddlers, they're like 15. I'm like, the hot dog is being cut, vertically, so they don't choke, and like forget about grapes. And even the other day, my son's trying to pop Cheetos in his mouth and like pop it up in the air and catch it. And I'm like, stop doing that. You're going to choke, and it's like being aware of the messages that we're sending are really important, because sometimes they're trying to do regular kid stuff and our themes are coming in and interrupting that.
Interesting. Yeah, that's so true. I think that catching ourselves and the things that we're doing, whether it's enabling or it's accommodating a child, it's hard sometimes to recognize, because our brain says you're doing a good job, you're cutting up the food the way you need to, and they stayed safe because of that. But without taking the risk and saying, I'm not cutting it up today, and the brain sometimes doesn't know that like they actually were safe anyway, and everything ended up being okay. And that's one thing I have people do is like try to recognize those and write them down, because we can easily forget. Write down all the accommodations or compulsions that are being done. And it's not get rid of all of them all at once, but what's one thing I can start working on and maybe risk and change in my life?
Yeah.
Tends to be a good place to start.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think sometimes we focus on what accommodations we're doing for our kids and their anxiety or their OCD themes. We're like, okay, check, I'm not doing that. Or maybe we do the space program and we're learning how to like pull back our accommodations. But then we don't look at our themes separate from that as well. And sometimes it gets normalized. I have worked with couples where they both have similar themes, and like I debate with the whole family, and I'm sure this happened to you too, where like it's normalized, what is normal, what's not, and the view of normalcy is through an anxiety or OCD lens. But I think sometimes when you start working on these things and you're in treatment or you're taking an online class, because you don't always have access, you start to realize like what is anxiety or OCD. And then you're like, oh my gosh, that's my anxiety or OCD, which can help.
Yeah, I like that. It's easier for someone else sometimes to point it out, like, hey,
Mhm.
you've been doing this thing for quite a while, and we feel safe doing it, and we don't know any better. But
Mhm.
really taking an honest look at ourselves to call ourselves out, even like, you need to stop doing this,
Yeah.
and not just stopping, but making it worthwhile by doing an exposure with it, or yeah, changing these behaviors and kind of testing out the theory usually that's in our brains.
Yeah. Can I sit with the hot dog that's cut in the opposite direction? you know, wow, that brought me a lot of discomfort. I mean, I was fortunate that my husband was like this rock who had like no anxiety. So he'd give me that look like, really? And then I'd be like, oh, that's me. Huh. That's my anxiety. And now my kids just took over. And so there's so much growth that we can have as parents, like by learning from our kids and having them as the impetus of us changing. Now my whole family, we all call each other out on our different issues.
Mhm.
Sometimes we have to put it in check, but my kids will call me out. They'll be like, they'll dress something weird. And I'm like, wait, you can't wear that to school. And they'll be like, Mom, this is your social anxiety. Like, I'm okay with these socks. And yeah, in the moment, it totally annoys me because they're 99% accurate most of the time. I don't want to call someone back. Why don't you call her back? And but it's empowering for my kids because it's nice for them to be able to help me and call me out and for me to call them out. And so it's not one-sided.
I love that you have that family dynamic set
Yes.
up. It definitely helps.
It does. It does. And I think that if parents can realize that it will help the family dynamic. It'll make it a family thing. Um, that's the important thing. It's not going to be separate. It's not going to expend more energy. It's a family function. And so it'll help. I'm a much better person because I'm working on that stuff than I would have been um, 17 years ago. I had my
Mhm.
first kid. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
I'm,
go on.
oh, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking of, you mentioned social anxiety. It's kind of the same for me. Social anxiety growing up and learning how to manage that and do really well at, like, the brain says, don't talk to that person. I'm going to go talk to them. Or it says, get out of line because everyone else behind you is angry. Like, you're taking too long. And like, I'm going to take maybe even longer to do it. That, like, working on myself, I can pass that to my children. Then I'm like, there's no way you're getting out of this thing, even though, I did as a child. No one told me any different. So, like, I think that's one thing, is like, we're helping ourselves, so we feel more freedom, but then we can pass that on to our children, that hopefully can pass that on to maybe their children.
Yeah. And that's true, right? Because there's this genetic component that how long do we want this to go down that genetic tree? And it's like genetically it's there, but what we do with it, we get to decide. And so building those muscles, teaching our kids by doing what we do and then teaching them, and then they'll teach their kids. That's beautiful. That's a gift to the to the tree, to the genetic
Yeah,
tree of anxiety and OCD.
absolutely.
So where do you think it would be good for parents to even start recognizing their own struggles? Like what if a parent's listening and they're like, I don't know if my anxiety or OCD is, you know, bad enough to warrant getting my own help, or I don't know how it's impacting. Where should they start?
Yeah. I usually look at, well, for kids and actually even adults, I ask this question. So if you had a magic wand and you woke up tomorrow morning, you could use this magic wand and a few things were different in your life, what would you want them to be? And sometimes that can be pretty telling. It can be like, I wish I could change my child's diaper without feeling anxiety, or I
Mhm.
wish I could let my child ride the bus without having to worry about them. I mean, whatever it could be, then it's like that, then that's an indication that's something that you'd like to change in your life. Or you can look at, what are the things I don't want to do anymore that I don't think I need to be doing? Like, I'm spending so much time cutting up this food, or accommodating my, this thing. Do I want to do that? And if not, then that's probably something to change. I think for most people, what I find is if they're questioning if they should see a therapist, it's probably likely that they would benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people that are very, very extreme into their OCD, and some people that like barely just found out they have it, and symptoms really aren't as bad, but to just know what to do. Because I think that's the key, is like, we don't have to wait for things to be bad to start. We just knowing the tools, even before things get bad, can make quite the difference.
Yeah, definitely. And if you take the time, let's say it's very mild, you take the time to just learn about anxiety or OCD or about approaches to squash it, you're going to take that and you're going to apply it to your kids. And I really feel like it's when you practice your own stuff, you're so much better. Like you said, you'd worked on it or you like experienced this growing up. And so it's natural to train your kids in a way that you've already practiced. So learning those things and doing it for yourself, you're going to be a much better coach for your kids versus sitting on the sideline, having your own struggles and just being like, I'm only going to focus on my kids. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes to mind is like, I'm trying to think of what are people thinking about as maybe they're listening to this. And one thing that comes to mind is like, where to start with some of this stuff is really just introducing uncertainty in the family life. Like almost all aspects of a child asks how long it's going to be till we get to wherever, even though you know the answer and you could say 5 hours, you can be like, yeah, it's 5 hours, 6 hours, 2 hours. One of those is going to be right. And they don't need to know everything. Kids don't need to know everything. And the more we practice that, we use that in our life just generally of like, do I need to know all these things or all these what ifs in my life? That most of the time we don't. That if there's anxiety and there's not an immediate threat, we already know our brain's probably throwing out a false signal. So to introduce uncertainty on purpose and say, I'm willing to not figure this one out and just see what happens, then
I love that. Yeah.
we tend to be happier.
Yeah. And it's such a good point because I think sometimes parents might be hearing this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, okay, I have to find treatment or I have to find some book and just that one simple step of, in general, sprinkling, uncertainty into your life is something that we can all do. And how uncomfortable does it make it? When Nathan said that, did you start to get anxious? I could feel like I would get anxious. And that's a sign that you want to lean into that, and in what areas can you bring some discomfort? And it's so, yeah, uncertainty, like, I don't know. Lately, my daughter has been like, this is going to sound totally cruel, but this is like life of living with an anxiety OCD therapist. She's like, I don't want the dog to die. And I mean, her dad obviously just died. So this is really sad, but she's like, I don't want the dog to die. Will the dog die? Yeah, the dog is going to die. Like we're going to have to sit with that. Hopefully not for a while. She's a Chihuahua and luckily she's pretty young. So I'm like, thank the gods for that. We have some time, but not giving that reassurance, like not being cruel, but will I throw up? I don't know, honey. You may or may not, But I think sprinkling that discomfort and not that reassurance in a lot of the things that we do and how we talk about things, not like ad nauseum, but I think in our world is a good start for the entire family.
For sure. Because you think about anytime we give a reassurance or assurance of something, sometimes, actually most of the time, we don't actually know for sure. And sometimes the catastrophes do happen. And I think that's the hard part, is our brain's really good at saying, I knew it. I knew I should have listened to this one thought out of the last million I had. This one finally came true. And we can't react upon those because we have lived uncertain for so long that something's bound to happen.
Yeah.
And I think of an example of, my kids just started school this week. My 5-year-old went to kindergarten for the first time. And the school sent out an email that said, like, don't worry, your kids won't get lost. We'll make sure they get on the right buses. Like, no one asked for that email as far as I know. But I saw that and I'm like, I mean, my first thought is like, she may or may not get on the right bus. And guess what happened? I got a call, that a voicemail that said, hey, we lost your daughter. We
Are
don't know
you
where she
kidding?
is. I
Oh my
know.
gosh, that's
And I'm
horrible.
like waiting at the bus stop and the bus hasn't come. And I'm like, uh-oh. And then 10 minutes later, like, we found her. She got on the wrong bus. And so it's like, see, there you go. You told me, I didn't even warrant a reassurance, anything. I was able to live uncertain. Maybe, maybe not. It might happen. She might get on the wrong bus. And it actually happened. I think the chances of that were so slim, but I'm not so devastated because I just told myself it's all going to work out just great. I actually let life just be life. And I think that's what's important, is we don't know everything, and it's okay to not know everything. When we solve the problem, everything works out. I think that's the most important part, is when there's a problem, we can solve it. When there's not a problem, there's nothing to solve other than just anxiety and thinking.
That's such a good example. That's like such a perfect example of, you know, them providing reassurance, and no one can guarantee anything, but you handled it, and how often are we trying to handle situations that are not in front of us? We're jumping the gun. I love that. That's a good example. I can hear my dog whining, wanting to come in, but
Awesome.
well, I will not edit that out. That'll just be part of the podcast. Real life stuff.
That's all right. You probably heard my kids crying in the back. So.
Yeah, these real life houses here, so that is okay. Yeah, so I love that. I feel like these just life approaches of how to sprinkle these things into our household will help parents, because they don't have to start somewhere fancy. I mean, they can, but I think just leaning into these things can be a great start. So I want to pivot. We're almost out of time. I want to talk about if parents are listening and they say, I'm feeling a little gung ho. Like, I think I want to, maybe I don't want to go out and get a therapist, so that you can always go to the International OCD Foundation at iocdf.org/find-help and find your own help. But if someone's like, it's not that bad, but I do want to educate myself. Can you talk a little bit about your courses that you offer?
Yeah, so we're only able to practice in the states that we're licensed in. And so for me, it's Texas and Utah. And so I created an online course. I was really thinking about, like, if I were to do this step by step with people who come through my office, what would it look like? And so I've created an online course for people to do. It's not treatment per se of like, hey, you don't need to see a therapist, but it's really takes you through the treatment for OCD, like understanding yourself, where it comes from, medications, how to do the treatment, like with different worksheets, and maintaining progress, and how family can help, all of that. That I counted it up. There's 42 videos in that thing.
That's a big course.
Yeah, and I keep adding to it because I'm like, oh, this would be good to add this. And what we know is, like, OCD is OCD. And so there isn't like, you need to take a course on relationship OCD.
Right.
It's like, actually, you just need an OCD therapist, or my course works for all OCD topics. But it's just knowing, like, that knowledge is so important, just to know what to do. Like, the concept of uncertainty, it's easy just to throw out the window. Like, yeah, I'm not doing that, it's uncomfortable. But knowing how to implement it in your life, I think that's what the course is all about, is just kind of self-directed, go through it, and can be accessed anywhere.
Yeah. And it's a good place to start, because I do feel like, even though we would like people to see therapists, we'd like them to, pursue treatment and get that local support. The reality is, a lot of people aren't going to do it. And a lot of people also want to maybe dabble first, or, there's a lot of barriers to therapy. Some people just want to absorb things in their couch. So it is a good place to start. And then I think OCD treatment is often counterintuitive. And so, unlike anxiety, I feel like you need a little bit of a roadmap. You need a big roadmap to say, oh, this is what you do, and this is the way you approach it. And so it's great that there's courses out there like yours that help parents, help themselves and understand that. And it will help them help their kids, and it will help them understand treatment for their kids as well, because they're going to get it based on how you're showing it. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Where can people learn about your class?
Yeah, it's OCD and anxietyonline.com.
which is a
So
great URL. You know?
yeah, I was surprised no one had that, but
I am too. It's like, man, he's good. I will leave
yeah.
the link in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I will leave a link in the description as well so that you guys can check out Nathan's online classes. You have other classes too, right?
Yeah, I just released a BFRB. So it's hair pulling, skin picking, and the same type of deal. Is just kind of figuring out what would people want to know or what do they need to know as far as treatment goes. Because you think OCD therapists are hard to find, like BFRB therapists are really hard to find. And so
Yeah.
this takes you through the treatment for that as well.
And that, yeah, that's really good to see some online resources on BFRBs because, yeah, I think a lot of clinicians aren't trained on that, and that's another area like the picking and the pulling and all of those body focused repetitive behaviors that if you're having or if your child has, great to be knowledgeable. Also, your YouTube channel, which has a great name too. How can people find you on YouTube?
Yeah, OCD and anxiety. That's
See,
the
it's really
channel
good.
name.
Yeah. And I'll put a link below. But also, I mean, if you just went to YouTube and typed in Nathan Peterson, your videos will pop up right away too. And they're definitely amazing. So even if you nothing else, start off with your YouTube videos. They are phenomenal and they're on covered on every topic. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natasha. I appreciate it.